Where do you see foreign direct investment this year? Has the outlook of lower economic growth worldwide affected this?
Well, as you know, the foreign direct investment around the world after the last crisis went down in a very substantial way. Nevertheless, in Mexico, we have been getting more foreign direct investment, and I'm sure that President Calderon is going to make a very important announcement of how Mexico has been getting more than 100 billion US of foreign direct investment in this administration, and we are looking forward to have even more. So we expect that for the end of the year, Mexico will have around 20 billion US dollars of foreign direct investment, which is a very important news, taking in consideration what has been happening around the world.
Is that higher or lower than what you were expecting?
Well, no, it is higher. As a matter of fact, it's already the same amount as the one that we were having just before the big crisis.
Now, investors are obviously very nervous and they're flocking in treasuries right now. What can you tell them about investing in Mexico?
Well, it's not just what we can tell as the federal government, it's also what the different analysts around the world have been talking about Mexico. One of the most important can be the results of KPMG or Alice Partners, A.T. Kearney, even the United Nations have been talking about Mexico as one of the most suitable places for making foreign direct investment, and also is one of the lowest cost of manufacturing costs country in the northern hemisphere, even 25% below the cost of U.S. now. So this represents a great opportunity for making investments in Mexico that will enable the different companies also to have exports to more than 44 countries which have a free trade agreement with Mexico. And this represents, of course, a very big importance for their future. And this is something that they have been capturing in Mexico, and that's why we are also getting that important amount of investment. If you take in consideration also the demographic bonus that we're having, and that our average age is below 27 years old, you will realize also the amount of engineers that Mexico is providing now, and this is also been an advantage for the companies that are being based now in Mexico and are addressed to export around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, in the past months, there's been certainly a crisis in the U.S. as far as the S&P downgrading the U.S. and this budget deal that came through. Has Mexico's policy about attracting investments changed at all? Have you shifted gears? Have you made your message different at all?
You know, President Calderon has been very sensitive into this, and what we have been doing, you know, the last crisis, of course, was an incredible crisis around the world. It's not a crisis that was invented in Mexico. Actually, we import that crisis from U.S., but we were able, with very different activities such as contracyclical events, to overcome to this crisis and to create those jobs that we were losing during the crisis. So that's why we had 5.4% of growth last year, and during the first trimester of the first quarter of this year, we were growing 4.6%, and this has been a steady situation for Mexico. Nevertheless, we are very cautious looking at what will happen or what is happening around the world with the commodities, with the situation of U.S., with the situation of Europe. And what we have been doing is, instead of solving those problems when they appear, let's say that what we have been doing is being prepared for different situations. And that's why we have been doing activities such as the one that we are doing here with Mexico Emprende, in order to create possibilities for those remittances that the Mexicans here in this side of the border are sending into Mexico. Part of those remittances can be used for creating new businesses in Mexico, and in that way you are also making new entrepreneurs, and in that way you are also increasing the internal market, which is the main possibility that we have if the crisis appear again in the world.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a lot of questions. What's your estimate on growth this year in Mexico?
Well, it has been the same. Of course, we have been decreasing, because if the economy around the world is going to be decreased, obviously Mexico is not absent of that situation. Nevertheless, you are talking about one of the countries that has been managing a very responsible way their finances. So what we have been seeing is that the growth will continue as the prospect is in between the 4 and the 5%. So we are going to continue growing.
Between 4 and 5%. How about next year? What are you thinking about next year?
It's also related in the lower numbers of the 3 and 4.5%.
4.5%. Okay, good. What's the most important single investment expected this year that's not yet been announced?
Well, there has been different ones in a very important amount. Most of them have been related in the car industry, in the automotive industry. We get just 2 very big announcements of foreign direct investment related with Japanese companies. One of them was announced just last week of Honda, also Mazda, and we have been having many of those. We're expecting to have more of those announcements before this year ends. You know that we have been defined as the most attractive country for manufacturing cars. We are already number 9 as a builder of cars, but number 6 as exporter of cars. But we are also number 1 in TV screens, number 2 in refrigerators, number 1 in intelligent phones, and so on. I can talk to you about many of those possibilities. What we are seeing as the new possibility in Mexico is also related with renewable energies, not just for creating the different spare pieces, for saying something, for that industry in solar panels, eolics, windmills, and all those things, but also related with energy itself. With the free trade agreement that we have with U.S., we are also able to send with zero tariffs energy to U.S. So this is a very important area of growing in the foreign direct investment that we are seeing.
About the auto manufacturing plants, will it be an American auto manufacturer or a European one?
Well, there are Europeans already in the pipeline for Mexico. Just for you to take in consideration, ProMexico has been created 4 years ago. The first year we visited 4,200 companies around the world with the different offices of ProMexico. But nowadays we are visiting more than 900 different companies per month. So the pipeline is growing, and it is quite important, the possibilities that we have, of course, in the manufacturing, the cars industry, but also in many of the other areas.
Can you tell us any major names, major car makers that might open a factory in Mexico, or may announce it this coming by the end of the year?
It's very tough to answer that question, because whenever you do those kind of things, the stock value of many of those companies can be modified. So we keep that quiet.
Well, we like that.
Is what they ask us to do.
Yeah. Okay. Are you confident that another auto manufacturer will open a or not open, but announce a factory in Mexico by the end of the year?
Absolutely. We're expecting that.
Okay. Good. Now, it's been reported that more companies are moving production to Mexico due to rising wages in China and proximity to the U.S. And what sectors specifically are coming back to Mexico?
Well, I was wondering about the textiles that many of them went to Asia. But as you already mentioned, because the labor cost and also the logistics have been increasing in Asia, so what we have been seeing is a return of many of those investments into Mexico. But also we are seeing a very important growth in what is related not just with manufacturing, but also with the creativity of the Mexicans. You know that during this administration there has been we have been building more than 91 different universities now. So the amount of engineers and technicians that Mexico is having per year now exceed many countries such as Germany, Brazil, even Japan, and even with United States. If you take the average of new engineers or technicians per 1,000 inhabitants, Mexico has 3 more than the States. So this is also a very important response of the situation that we are facing. So now we are seeing not just made in Mexico, but created in Mexico. We are seeing more and more centers for creativity, in which Mexico is taking part now for IT, for research and development, many of those things.
Are you expecting, you alluded to it before, are you expecting other big investments in non-traditional sectors in Mexico? Can you offer any details, what people can expect?
Well, as I said, no, we are seeing new areas such as mechatronics, biotech, things that we were not doing in the past that now people are interested in investing on.
Biotech.
Yeah, it is quite interesting.
Which area of Mexico is that?
Well, agriculture, for instance, pharmaceutical industry, it's also very much related into that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned remittances, another big source of foreign money to Mexico, and given what's happened in the U.S. and Europe, are you expecting a decline in remittances for the remainder of this year?
Well, we don't know that. That may happen. But what I can tell you is that from 2009 to 2010, we see a slight increase on remittances, even in a very tough situation. And during the first 5 months of this year, we have been growing that amount in 4.5%. So far, the number is increasing. Maybe it will decrease, but I don't know what will happen at the end.
Do you have a forecast on it?
Well, last year was 21 billion, 21.2 billion. We're expecting at least an amount similar to that.
Okay, so it won't be declining, is what you're expecting?
Yeah, we expect that. Nevertheless, I have to tell you that what we are doing with this fund for migrants is actually to take benefits of those remittances in order to make the possibility or made available for the Mexicans outside of Mexico, for the migrants of Mexico, to create new companies in their country. So this is quite important, and it's also taking in consideration the women that are left when the Mexicans came to this side of the border. Then the women can become now also an entrepreneur with the money that has been sent by their husband or their father, or etc.
Okay. Now, we know that some sectors like autos and oil are having good momentum in terms of exports, but economists surveyed by the central bank see a trade deficit of $4.4 billion, American dollars, for 2011. What are the chances that Mexico will have a trade surplus this year?
Well, as I said, I believe it's too early to say that. Let's see how much really is going to happen. No? What I can tell you is that our exports are very much related also with our trade with U.S. You know that we have been growing from 30 billion U.S. to more than 600 billion U.S. of exports commercial exchange around the world, and around 80% of that is related with our exports to U.S. So obviously, what happened in U.S. is a very much important area for us. But what we have been seeing so far is that many of the imports that are coming from, the exports that are going to U.S. because they're imports, are still growing. We took a very important part of the market share of the U.S. imports. At the beginning of the administration, we were around 9% of the market share of the imports of U.S., and nowadays we are at 12.7%. So even in these very difficult situations, Mexico is still growing in their exports into U.S.
Is there a way to use a metric to track your trade deficit in terms of the price of oil? I mean, if the price of oil drops $1 a barrel or something like that, will your trade deficit rise? Or contrary, if the price of oil rises $1, will your trade deficit decrease?
It's very interesting what you are saying, because in the past, the economy of Mexico was very much related just with oil. Nowadays, oil represents 13% of our exports, so it's not that important as used to be. Of course, it is very important. It's the number one area of exports that we have, but it's 13%. So if you take in consideration remittances, tourism, or just the car industry, will be a very important chunk of our GDP.
Okay. Now, Mexico, you mentioned that you expect the economy to grow around 4% this year, which is basically in line with what economists are expecting, maybe 4.5% next year. I think economists are expecting maybe a little slower next year, but still around 3.85, which is still very good. In the U.S., the economy seems to be slowing to below 2% growth. So obviously, your unemployment rate's half to what the U.S. is, basically, and you're growing twice as fast as the U.S. Why do you think there is that divergence going on? Well,
of course, what has been happening in the past was very important. So obviously, the situation of the way in which the finances of Mexico has been treated has to be a very important component of the answer. And we have been managing our finances in a very responsible way. It is obvious that what we are facing now was also related in the way in which credits were assigned in the past, and obviously the world is suffering for that. So that's why this is not now a crisis that has been invented in Mexico or imported, as I was saying. But I also have to tell you that our strategy on that, just take in consideration Europe. Many of the goods that Europe is using, 75%, is also being produced in Europe. And if you think in what we are having with US, it's not even 50%. So we need to increase also that. And part of the strategy is also to look into the South, which means we need to be much more integrated also with Latin America. And that's why we are also, as you realize, just a few months ago, President Calderon signed an agreement with Peru, Chile, and Colombia in order to go deeply in what is called Alianza del Pacífico, for having more and more relation with those markets that are growing faster. Nowadays, Asia and Latin America are the fastest growing areas in the world. So we have our position in North America, but also we are a very proudly Latin American country as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, the U.S. has had, the Congress has had struggles approving a free trade pact with Colombia. Yeah. Would you recommend that as a way to help the U.S. boost this trade or boost its economy?
Well, I believe that it's very important to be nowadays. Let me give you an example. When Mexico signed his first free trade agreement, there were around 34 free trade agreements around the world. Nowadays, we're talking about more than 280 free trade agreements. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something very important to look into the erosion that many of the free trade agreements have been having. So what you need more than ever is to think in a regional basis. And I believe that this crisis also means a great opportunity for North America, because what we need to do between Canada, US, and Mexico is not just thinking on competing, but more than that, in complementing ourselves and make this area of the world more and more competitive. And in that way, we are also going to succeed in the future situation of the economy around the world.
Well, that's a good point. Obviously, as the U.S. economy goes, it benefits Mexico. If there's one or two ideas that you could suggest to the U.S. to improve its economy, what would you do?
Well, first of all, instead of, as I said, building walls or keep competing, we need to complement ourselves. It's obvious, and this is something that is written in many books, economy books. If you are a country intensive in capital and you have a country intensive in labor, such as Mexico, there is a very easy equation of having better results for the future. So the first thing that I will recommend is actually to really look what the companies are doing, which is looking for the best place to invest. And it's obvious that Mexico has been that place for North America. That also has to be taken in consideration by the governments and the economies. And it's not just to think that the labor of Mexico is taking the labor of US. No, it's actually to complement. Those are very different possibilities. And if we think in a regional basis, of course the results are going to be much better than if we think just in our neighborhood or in our country.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, one of the issues in the U.S. is the corporate tax rate. Would you say Mexico has a more favorable corporate tax rate than the U.S.?
Well, I will not think in the corporate tax itself. I will much more than that to think in the manufacturing cost, or I will think in the whole picture. And as a whole picture, obviously, the possibilities that Mexico is offering right now are much more attractive than the ones in U.S.
Okay, great. One last question on immigration. It seems to me, one thing I haven't heard much is the demographics of Mexico are changing very dramatically, and there's not as many immigrants from Mexico going to the U.S. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and this is happening for different things. One of them, obviously, is the economic situation in the U.S., but the other one is also the opportunities that they are finding in Mexico, and that's why we are also looking forward to catch also the Mexicans that are in the other side of the border of Mexico, which means U.S., mm-hmm. to help them to really overcome into those situations and to have their own businesses also in their country.
So going forward in the next 5 or 10 years, do you expect the immigration issue to be less of an issue between the two countries?
I honestly expect that the government of U.S. will approach in a different way the situation of the immigrants of Mexico in this country, to realize that 9% or more than that of the labor in this country is also related with the immigrants of Mexico, and to make different answers in order to also solve the problems of the economy in this side of the border.
Okay. One last question. The drug traffickers, the situation, how would you describe it right now in Mexico for Americans who just hear the headlines?
Well, talking about headlines, people that make decisions, business decisions, are done those decisions looking into the numbers, looking into the different possibilities, and fortunately what we have been seeing is that the fight against crime that Mexico is taking, the government of Mexico is taking, represents also guarantee for their investments, and the answer of that is that we are getting more foreign direct investment. So it is right what we are doing, and probably what has been said is that Mexico is a dangerous place, but the real thing is that Mexico is a great opportunity for businesses.
So with the foreign investors are looking at the level of drug trafficking crime there, and they're not afraid to invest anyway, because you can measure that by the amount of investment they're making. Is that right?
Yes, this is exactly what I'm saying, but also I believe that we need to put in a real perspective what is happening in Mexico. What is happening in Mexico is that for years the authorities were not taking decisions into that, and nowadays what we are seeing is that we are having a big fight against crime. So that, as I said, guarantees the future investments and the investments that we are having right now, because what we are seeing is that Mexico is fighting for the law to prevail against crime. And in the past, the crime was just considered to be something related to exports of drugs. And as in every business, if it's valid to say that, even in the illegal activities such as this one, they were looking for diversifying themselves. So it's not just passing drugs or being the corridor for drugs. It's also what they were doing, because nobody was fighting against them, also in Mexico, in order to do different activities such as kidnapping or other activities that the criminals were doing. And nowadays what you are seeing is that we are fighting against that in order to make the law to prevail in Mexico, and that's why the foreign direct investment is also flowing, because it gives guarantee for the stability of the investment.
Okay.